Hi, everybody, and welcome to Chai Side Chats, co-presented by Creativity Awakening and Jayamangala. I am your host, Aishwarya Subramanian. This is an exclusive interdisciplinary talk show featuring interviews with folks about various topics, including creativity, the arts, healing, spirituality, mental and emotional well-being, to mention a few. Today's episode features a duo of trained Bharatanatyam dancers who also utilize dance, movement, and the arts in psychology research, treatment, and healing. Currently pursuing her PhD in creative arts therapy from Drexel University, my first guest is a certified dance movement therapist and co-artistic director of Spilling Inc., an arts organization based in the DC metro area of the United States. My second guest is a UK-based psychologist and founder-director of Equilibrium International, a social enterprise dedicated to using the arts for mental well-being. Here's hoping for a fruitful and enlightening conversation about some topics that are very near and dear, not only to me, but also to my guests. Please welcome Nalini Prakash and Dr. Gayathri Ganapathy. Hi, Nalini. Hi, Gayathri. Welcome to Chai Side Chats. Thank you guys for being here. I wanted to begin our episode today by asking you both a question that I get pretty often as an expressive arts therapist about your journeys into the work that you do. So if you could just share a little bit about what brought you into this intersecting field of dance, arts, and mental health, so our viewers can kind of get a sense of your story.
Sure. Thank you for having me today. And I'm happy to be on Chai Side Chats and have this opportunity to talk about my work and my journey as a dancer, as a dance therapist, and my work in mental health. My journey in dance began when I was about 3 years old in Hyderabad, when I was enrolled in a dance school where I was just trying. I was very hyperactive as a child, and so my mother needed me to expend that energy, and she put me in this center where Sumati Kaushal was teaching dance then. And when we transitioned from Hyderabad to Chennai, Sumati auntie told my mother, she had spotted the talent and said, when you move to Chennai, there's a lot of good teachers there. You should see that she continues. And that's where I then was enrolled with at Sri Bharatalya with Sudharani Raghupati, Sudhanti. Over the years, I trained over there, really became more serious about my dance. My passion for dance grew there. When I became that serious, I also decided to study more in my master's. And so I did my master's in performing arts in Baroda at MS University. And then after I got married, I moved to the Nilgiris in Kunur. And I started my own institution there, Silambam, where I started teaching, taught for about 20 years. So this was my journey in dance, performance, education, choreography. And on the side, I also was very interested in social justice. And so I worked in a center called Udavi, where I worked with children with various disabilities. And I volunteered my time there for almost 15, 20 years. Working with these children. However, I felt very inadequate when I was asked to use movement and dance with these children because I had no training and I didn't know how to use a structured form like Bharatanatyam with children who could barely move or hold their necks and heads up. So that's when I was really fortunate. I met Tripura Kashyap and I attended one of her workshops. She is one of our pioneers of dance movement therapy in India and has also founded the Creative Movement Therapy Association of India, of which now I am on the advisory council. And after I met Tripura and I learned about dance therapy, I came back to school 20 years later to study, do another master's in dance movement therapy. Of course, it wasn't available in India, the master's, so I came to Drexel University. And as we know, mental health is not a very common subject in India. It's not very much talked about. At least I know when I was growing up, things are changing now. But for me, that was a very new subject and area. And so when I came into this field is when I started learning more about it. I had one internship, one practicum where I worked for 10 weeks in a psych hospital, but that was the only experience I had in mental health. So when I graduated and I was looking for a job, I was hoping to continue my work with children. However, life took me in a different direction. And I was fortunate and very honored to get a position as a dance movement therapist at St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Washington, D.C., where dance therapy was born. So for me, it was really an honor and a privilege to be working in a hospital setting there. And so that's basically the work that I did. And then I have now gone back to Drexel to do a PhD, and I'm continuing my work in violence prevention. So my research is really looking at examining dance movement therapy interventions to see the effects on empathy and peer relationships and mostly in ethnic bullying. I'm looking specifically at ethnic bullying in middle school. So this is how my work has continued, and we'll see where it takes me.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. It's great to get kind of an overview of how you started off with just the dance experience and the education, and then how that brought you into intersecting that with mental health and the research that you're doing right now. Awesome. Yeah, Gayathri, I'd love to hear your kind of story as well, which I think there's some similarities and some differences. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking, oh, that's such a rich body of experience, Nalini. I mean, thank you for sharing. It was that's quite a lot that you've done, and I think the one thing we both have in common is probably Tripura Kashyap, because that has been, I think, another influencing factor in me going in this direction, definitely. So my journey, again, it started long time ago. I was a kid, and I think I was 5 or 6 when I started lessons. Bharatanatyam caught my fancy at a very young age when I went for a dance recital. And I think that was for the first time for a dance recital that I sat in a second row and I did not move for the entire show. And my mother was quite surprised, because if it was any other Carnatic concert or anything else, I would be running around or trying to annoy everyone around me. But this dance concert was the only one where I sat quietly, and the entire, I think it was an Arangetram that I went for, and I sat through the entire thing completely mesmerized and fascinated. The other thing that has always been with me is storytelling. Growing up in a typical South Indian household, you always have a lot of stories revolving around Hindu mythology, and there's a lot of storytelling that we are brought up with. So these are the two things that have always, I think, I've carried with me. Now moving on, I wasn't a very focused teenager, or I wasn't a very focused youngster, but psychology is a subject that caught my fancy. I just picked up a psychology textbook and I started reading it one day. And I think probably 15 or 20 years back, when I started doing psychology for the first time, what I wanted to do was media psychology. It was just something I read, and I said, okay, this looks interesting. Let's do media psychology. But then, of course, through the as I went ahead with my undergrad, and it is when I came to my master's, where I did my undergrad in psychology, literature, and sociology. And then I went ahead and I picked up clinical psychology for my master's. And that's when everything really started shaping up. I think I realized that I would like to continue working where I combine dance and psychology around them. Because one of my research projects, the topic that I chose was judgment of facial expressions. And it required a lot of data collection, the usual things that are associated with research. But I just picked up judgment of facial expression because as soon as I saw the topic, the first thing that popped in my head was, the Navarasa. Why not I use the Navarasa as a tool? So that's the reason why I picked up that topic. And I think there were 2 semesters where there was a lot of research around it that completely caught my fancy. And I thought, this looks like fun. Why not, just continue doing the same thing? And it was around this time also that I think I attended 1 or 2 workshops by Tripura Kashyap, again, the pioneer of dance and movement therapy in India. And I think at the end of the day, I was sore, I had, limbs that were hurting, but my mind was blown. And I just thought, this is so amazing. If I could actually put all of these together and actually combine two of my passions, that's dance and psychology, that would be amazing. And that's how it just started. And I went ahead and I think I started applying into universities. I tried to search for a supervisor around in India, but it was quite difficult because what I was trying to do was also quite niche. I think I was trying to convince and persuade people, but yeah, it was, like I said, it was quite new at the time in India. But finally, somehow I managed to get through a university in the United Kingdom. It was University of Lincoln School of Psychology. I finished my PhD in 2015, 2016. And it's after that that I started Equilibrium International. It's a mental health and well-being organization. And one of the things we also do as an organization is looking at using arts for mental health and well-being purposes. Yeah. So in a nutshell, that's what it is.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. One thing that came up for me as both of you were sharing your respective stories is something that I remember learning in graduate school and doing a little bit of research on just to kind of understand the field a little more is dance therapy or art therapies versus art as being therapeutic. And I think that I'm saying that because I think it's really important to differentiate between those two things, especially for folks who may not be as familiar. And I know there's a lot of people who say like, oh, dance is very therapeutic for me, or dance is very healing for me as an activity. But I do think that is very different from using it in an intentional way as a treatment approach, or using it for particular, mental health conditions, or to help people with whatever challenges that they're facing. And I think that kind of brings me to another question that I had about just roles, because obviously, both of you are dancers. I'm a dancer as well. And I'm sure that each of us has experienced dance to be therapeutic for us, outside of the fact that we use dance, movement, and the arts in a therapy setting. So I'm curious about just how you conceptualize your role as a performing artist or as a dancer compared to your work as a practitioner who incorporates dance, movement, and other art forms into the healing process or into research. Like for yourselves, what's the distinction between those two roles, or those two ways of using the arts?
Yeah, that's a question that comes up often. The term dance movement therapy is used very loosely with anybody who's using dance for healing. But there really is a distinction between dance as therapy and dance movement therapy per se, because as you say, we all know that dance is therapeutic. I know it made me feel good. And that's where I didn't have the knowledge, right? When I was asked to then use my skills as a dancer with these children, I drew a blank, because you need that training, you need that psychotherapeutic aspect to the movement to be able to process and understand then what's going on in the psyche with the movement, the mind and the body, and that connection. And I think that's the distinction, because it's a very specific way that we then work with our clients once we are trained in this way of understanding the psyche. And so when I use dance for myself, it is therapeutic. I perform, or even if I'm not performing, I just sometimes need to go down to the studio and let out some emotions and energy that might be bottled up, which is really helpful for me. And I feel when I work with my clients, it's a very different focus. And I get this question very often from people who don't understand what dance therapy is. Oh, do you teach your patients dance? Do you teach them Bharatanatyam? And so that the thing in India is that because dance and music is so integral and part of our lives, and then it does always culminate in a performance, or, it has to be performative and we need those audiences, that it's difficult to understand that dance and movement can also be used just as a way to heal or for self-expression and for our well-being and our health. I think these two roles that you talk about, Aishu, of being a dancer and then being a dance movement therapist, as a co-artistic director with Vijay Palaparthi in Spilling Ink, we do choreographies and we present them, right, to audiences. So when you go through that process, there's also a lot of stress sometimes. Things need to get together, the choreography is happening, dancers need to be coordinated, and we do most of that ourselves: lighting, sound, music, costuming. That can get really stressful as well. And then on the other hand, I have my work as a dance therapist, where I'm dealing with working with clients who have this heavy this heaviness that they carry through their trauma. But what the beautiful balance I found was that when it got a lot at my work with my clients, I had my dance to distract me and take me away from those stories. And then when this became a little stressful with performances coming up, we have all this to finish, and this stress that came there, then my work at the hospital really would lift me up. Because frankly, my clients, they're all human beings. And when I come out of a group, sometimes it wasn't like I came out feeling drained. Most times I came out feeling uplifted, because we would move together, we would dance together, we would have fun together. And it wasn't always that the sessions were heavy. So I would come out feeling very full and very uplifted. So I think that's how I usually balanced my role as a dancer and my role as a dance movement therapist. It was a beautiful balance.
That sounds wonderful. I'm glad that it was it has worked out that it kind of offsets each other at different points in time. So Gayathri, what about you? How do you kind of think about the balance between those roles, or do you even see them as separate things? I know that things are changing so much in the field, so I'd love to hear your perspective.
I think it's, it's definitely, it's a lot like what Nalini said. There is always a dual role. There's a dual personality that we have, where there is, I remember where, when I was doing my PhD, my supervisor would constantly tell me, yes, it's time for the scientists to come forward and the artists to take a back seat, is what she would always say. Because for me, what comes naturally is movement, because that's what I've had with me for all these years. And what I would do is come up with the movement first, and then go, trace my way backwards and go with, find the review, the review of literature would be done. And my supervisor found that very fascinating. She said, generally, it's the other way around, where, you do the review of literature and then you try to enter and see what you want to identify. But here I had the movement ready with me, and I wanted to go the other way around. But yes, there is this, dual existence that's always there. Like I said, dance has always been there with me, but it's something, talking about the whole, I think self-healing angle, isn't it? That's what we start with. This is something I had never realized, but I think in retrospect, now, when I look at it, I've always been a very fidgety, anxious kind of a person. And for me, dance has helped, would always help me expel that excess energy. A form of catharsis, where if I wouldn't dance for a while, I would actually experience, like they say, withdrawal symptoms. And it would make me very, very, very upset. And I would actually go around going, I can't believe there's no performance yet. I can't actually believe that. What am I going to do? I need to wear my my chelanga. I want to wear, the dancing bells, and I want to give a performance. And of course, it becomes very difficult when you're, trying to write up your PhD and you tell people, no, I want to go give a performance, and they're like, nope, that doesn't work. You need to choose. I think that was the tough bit, but there's always, I think they coexist always. The other thing that I also realized is when I actually started using movement for interventions. When I started working with different populations, the response that people had to the movement that you would try to introduce into their space was very fascinating for me to learn from. There was another group that I worked with. This was a project that I worked with a university in the northwest of England where I live. It was a movement for people with Parkinson's. So as part of their learning routine, one of the things that I introduced was the Alapadma. And all they had to, I asked them to do is, okay, think of the Alapadma, and it is like, I just said, imagine it to be a full-blown lotus. And that's all. I said that and I left it at that and I forgot. Now, at the end of the whole project, I had this lady come up to me and she said, thank you so much. And the one thing I'll never forget is what you've taught me. The full-blown lotus is what she said. And I said, is that your favorite Hasta Mudra, is what I asked her. She said, yes, because, and this is where, I thought, this is amazing. This is where I get to learn so much that's different. And I got to know how it is making a therapeutic difference to my participants. She said, yes, the full-blown lotus, when I invert the full-blown lotus, helps me open the lids on jars. And a full-blown lotus also helps me open doorknobs. And I just went, who knew? I mean, who knew? That's the way she thought of it. And another thing which also, I think this actually, it got me very emotional, where she said, so she was diagnosed with, I think, mild Parkinson's, but she had a regular sales and marketing job. And she said, every time I hold the full-blown lotus behind me while making a presentation, I feel confident, and it helps me control my tremors, which again, I thought was so powerful. And that's when you realize something as small as the Alapadma that we use for, I don't think I had given it a second thought of, what an Alapadma can do, and what a difference a mudra like an Alapadma can do to another person, because you always use it in your dance to express various things. But to another person, it could actually be helpful in trying to learn or implement a life skill. And that's where the whole therapy aspect comes in. So yeah, this is where I feel, dance can be aesthetically beautiful. It can be used for storytelling. It can be, used as in performances, but it can also be very powerful when you have the whole therapy and the well-being aspect of it. Can also be, I think there is a lot we are still to discover with the whole dance and things associated with it.
Totally. Yeah, no, I think there's always so much to learn about how these things impact us, but also how they're going to impact the people that we work with. And actually, that kind of brings me to my next question, which is I wanted us to talk about product-oriented versus process-oriented art making. And I think we've started getting into this a little bit, but I make that distinction because I think there is a difference, because there are artists who are maybe creating with, an idea of, okay, I'm creating this painting, or I'm creating this poem, or I'm creating this music or dance piece that's going to be presented in front of an audience or is going to be performed in some way. Versus process-oriented, I think, is maybe more similar to the types of work that we do with our clients or with our participants and patients, because it's the, the process of engaging with the art itself is healing, rather than, like, the focus is not really on what they're making or what comes out of it. So I wanted to just hear from both of you how you personally experience each approach, because, you've you're, as performers and as dancers, you do the product-oriented thing, but then as, folks who are facilitating healing in some way, it's definitely more in the liminal space of being with the process and being with whatever comes up in the process. So I'm really curious to hear about just how each of you personally experiences those approaches, and if there's any overlap, or if they even are really as different as we are conceptualizing them to be.
Yeah, I think, as you said, Aishu, in the therapeutic space, in that liminal space, it is really the process that is more important than the product. Gayathri, you talked about performance as well, which can be part of therapy as well. It depends on the context, right? So as a dancer and a choreographer, while the process is also important there. It's not that the process is not important. In fact, the process is where the work actually happens, right? And then you have the final product, but then the final product goes away so quickly, but the process has taken so many months to reach up to that product. So I feel even there as a dancer, I find the process a very enriching experience because we learn a lot during that process. But it's different in a therapy setting because the process is where the therapy is actually happening. There is no final product most times. It's really about this process of moving together and, finding all those emotions that are coming up and then talking about them and talking through them and moving towards that recovery and wellness. But I do have an example where I used performance in the therapeutic space when the context came up. And it was in the context of trauma with a client who was one of the clients who I used Indian elements from dance of hastas and mudras and storytelling and the rasas, some of the navarasas. So in that experience, my client would write poetry where she was expressing her, or rather telling her story, right? She put it all into imagery through animals and birds and nature and wrote poetry about it. And then she took tools from me to tell her story through movement, to dance and movement. So she used hastas and she used for instance, she asked me, how do I show surprise? And so we know that in trauma, very often there's this shutdown, there's a flat affect, there's depression, there's no feeling, there's no emotion anymore. So how did she really started slowly re-experiencing those emotions, embodying them through the tools that I provided her with. And so learning how to show surprise, learning how to show fear, starting to embody some of those emotions. And then she asked me for, based on her poetry, she asked me for hastas that would show a snake or a bird, the fish and the water, trees and seeds. And, as she was telling her story, I was building with her. And her audience was actually me initially, right? So the therapist becomes your witness. We are witnessing your story. We are with you, and we are holding that space for you as you're telling your story, processing with you. So eventually she asked me if she could perform what she had choreographed, or first she wrote the poetry and the choreography or whatever she had, the story she told through movement for her peers on her unit, in her, what they call the house or the unit, and for the staff there, the clinical staff. Along with her clinical staff, her treatment team, we had a conversation and we decided how it would be done. And so twice after that, she presented. So she had this little mini performance in the morning on her unit for all her peers and invited whoever was interested. And so this is where performance became part of therapy, where it enhanced her self-esteem and her ability to stand out there in front of an audience and show herself. So there's two sides to that coin of performance being, should you use it, shouldn't you use it? And there's this conversation that goes on about performance is not therapy, but in this case, it was therapeutic. And she really used it to help herself grow and move forward. So yes, process is most important in therapy, but I do believe that in certain cases, performance is equally important when the need arises and in context.
I actually, yes, Nalini, I agree with you. Context is so important, isn't it? It's what you're presented with and what the situation is. What I feel I have used a lot in my own kind of interventions and in the way, I have gone about working with or dealing with is it's definitely the process is it's always it's also the way, like my husband says, he always says trust the process, because the process is so important. Sometimes we get so caught up in the end goal or the product that you fail to focus on the process, where there are so many tiny tidbits that you get, precious tidbits from the whole process that you might think is not important, but it's those little details that can end up making a lot of difference. So coming back to the question, I sometimes think, yes, definitely it's the context, but it's also a fine balance between, trying to see if you can have both those aspects involved in whatever you're planning. Now, what do I mean by that is every time I go into, say, a session or there is a project at hand, I always try and have a rough framework. I know where I need to start from and what is roughly the end goal that I wish to achieve, say, at the end of 6 sessions or at the end of 1 session. That's something where I have a rough framework. So probably that's where the whole product, the product idea comes in. But again, for me, it's the process that I pay, there's more weightage on the process eventually. So yes, there is a framework, but it's the entire process that you go through. What is it that, because again, it's not just you, it's also the responses that you get from your clients and how you can weave in those responses with how you wish to continue that entire session or the entire project or the entire intervention. And that's where I say, there can be that whole fine balance that comes in. But yeah, for me, I mainly think that product, yes, but it's the process. Process is king when it comes to such approaches, yes.
Another question that I often get, or the thing that I've heard from folks in the context of using arts for healing or for any purpose really, is there are people who are maybe interested in creative or artistic activities, but sometimes they're held back from engaging in them because of the fear of not being good enough or not really thinking of themselves as like an artist or a performer. And I think that I know with doing expressive arts therapies or dance movement therapies with adults, I imagine that there's more resistance that comes up because of this fear of, well, I'm not really a dancer or I'm not really good at this, so I'm not even going to try. So I'm curious, because both of you have worked with a variety of populations, I'm curious if you have any advice or words of wisdom for folks who are interested in creative things or artistic things, but maybe they're held back because of this fear or this perception that they have to create a final product that is of a particular quality.
Absolutely. And I'm sure, Gayathri, you'll agree with me. And I know how you stress that the process is really important. And this is exactly what it boils down to, right? We are not looking for an end product where you're going to be performing in front of an audience or, have to look good. And it's so true that you don't need to be a dancer to come into a dance therapy session, or you don't need to be an artist, a professional artist, painter. I know for myself, we all have our preferences in the arts, right? So I am a dancer, yes. And then in India, we do dance and music. So for me, music is also really easy to like go as my go-to if I need to. Art is not something I'm comfortable with. And I have the same problem. If somebody tells me, all right, let's sit down and do some art, I will totally get, my heart will start racing because that's not where I'm comfortable. But then that's where it's so important to let the clients know that it's the process, not the product. You're going to just use this medium of art, either the drawing or the art or the music or the dance, to express yourself, to tell your story. There's no judgment in this space. So when a client says, I don't dance, I usually say, well, you move your body in different ways, right? Even if it's not expressive dance particularly per se, but you're doing functional movements constantly, that's also your own dance in the world. Your connection with other people in the world is also a dance. How do you connect? How do you socialize? How do you, meet? So that's also a dance. So I kind of simplify it so it doesn't sound that intimidating. I have them connect with the heartbeat. I say, like, you have your own rhythm inside of you. So how about we connect with that and do some rhythm? So making it really simplifying it, moving the head, or just doing really small movements to encourage them, and then making that bigger, and educating them on how we use movement, dance and movement in healing. So yeah, it is a challenge a lot of times. But once they come into the space with you and try it out, then they understand. Once you've got them in there, then it's you've got them in there, and then you can help them move forward with that.
Like you rightly put, Nalini, it's not about a dance performance that you're preparing them for. The minute they understand and they realize that, oh, this is something where, I can have my own inputs and I can own the resources that's provided to me and use it in the way I wish to. The entire game plan changes. The difference that you see from the first session to the final session, again, if not final session, even by the third or fourth session, it's amazing. The ones who will be, standing behind in the corner of the room, holding the radiator behind them, and who will absolutely refuse. After about a few sessions, you'll find them slowly weaving their way in between. They'll start joining, and then they will come in between, and then all of a sudden, one fine day, you will see them popping right in front of you and going, I think we need to do this. And I'll go, well, where were you all these days? So it's amazing to see the way confidence gets, built. And again, definitely, I agree with you, Nalini. People, they change from the first session to the third or fourth. It's amazing to see the change in them.
Since both of you touched on how you use elements of Indian classical dance forms and just other dance forms in general in your work, I thought it would be cool to do an activity where we are going to be using some images, but also some movement and mudras or hand gestures. So I have some images that I'm going to pull up, and I want to invite you to choose, each of you to choose 2 images. So one is going to be for how other people see you as a professional. So this could be in your role as a psychologist, dance movement therapist, as however you want to define professional for yourself today. And another image for how it could be how you see yourself, or maybe a hidden or lesser known part of yourself that maybe other folks don't really see. So I'm going to pull up my image. Once you have your 2 images, I'm going to also invite you to choose a mudra for each image. Choose a hand gesture to go with each one. So it can be whatever you would like. And then we are just going to explore movement with that mudra a little bit. Try to see if you can create something. I mean, just like a short movement sequence. So we're playing with process and product here, just because I think we can. So yeah, we'll just give it a try and see what emerges. Awesome. That was beautiful. Thank you both for sharing that. I'm going to pull up the image again, and I would love if you guys could share, if you feel comfortable sharing, the 2 images that you picked.
Mine were 15 and 16.
Mine were 1 and 16.
So the tree was common.
Nice.
As a dancer and choreographer, it's hard not to think of an audience through your process,
Yeah.
Because you're so used to that all the time.
Yeah.
Therapy is so different.
Mm-hmm.
So therapy is so different, especially if you are a performer and if you know your dance. So I think maybe it might be easy if you don't know how to dance, because then your process is so true and so pure. Whereas, at least for me, I feel through this process that my mind was always like, what about this, or why not that? Or, you're constantly thinking about how the end product is going to look. So it's interesting.
Yeah. That's it's true. Even when I was looking at the images and I chose the images, it started off with, an experience that I had from an intervention, and I started doing that, but then it suddenly moved to performer mode, where the whole expressions and abhinaya began to play, because and that's when suddenly there was a sort of, that's interesting. How did I suddenly from the like I said, from the psychologist, I suddenly became the performer on stage because the whole Abhinaya aspect came in. So yeah, no, definitely, it's there's an overlap always, from time to time.
Totally, yeah. Well, that brings us to the end of the episode, but thank you so much for, to both of you for being on Chai Side Chats. And I've really loved our conversation today. I think it just is such a different feeling for me to like talk with, fellow professionals and colleagues in the field, because there's so much richness there in sharing experiences and kind of sharing our journeys and stories with one another. So yeah, I've loved having you both and hope you enjoyed yourselves as well. Thank you so much.
Hi everyone, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Chai Side Chats with Gayathri and Nalini about some of the healing modalities of dance and movement therapy. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to the Creativity Awakening YouTube channel for regular updates. Episodes for Chai Side Chats premiere every 2 weeks, so stay tuned, our next one is coming soon.